Hey everyone, welcome back to bageltcg. Today we're going to be starting a budget deck series for heavy hitters. I'm going to be showing you a classic constructed deck and a blitz deck, basically the same deck, just altered for each format. And I'm going to be going through each hero from the set, starting with the Brutes, Kayo, and then the next video of Rhinar, and then the Guardians with Betsy and then Victor, and then the Warriors with Kasai and Olympia. So today we're starting with Kayo. In a few days we'll have Rhinar, and so on and so on. These are all budget decks. There's not really a set budget. I'm trying to get them all as cheap as possible, while still being very powerful and able to win any event you bring it to, up to a certain point. So I'm trying to make them as budget as possible. This one is only $30, so one of the more budget options. I think the most expensive is Victor, which is a little over 100. So they're kind of in that range. I'm going to try to keep them as cheap as possible, though. I'm really trying to stay under 100, and even under 50 if that's possible. So let's start with Kayo. Kayo, if you don't know what he does, is a brute hero. Brutes traditionally have big attacks and they focus around the 6 power metric. So a lot of their stuff cares about 6 power. This one cares if you discarded something with 6 or more power, etc., etc. So you're playing mostly stuff with 6 power. But Kayo does have the ability where your attack action cards get +1 while they're in any zone other than the combat chain. So basically all of your 5 powers become 6s when they are not on the combat chain. So when they're not attacking or defending, for example, if they're in your hand or deck, which is important for random discards. Your deck randomly discards a lot. For example, with Bare Fangs, when this attacks, draw a card, then discard a card at random. If the card had 6 or more power, this gets +2. So you really want to be randomly discarding a 6 or more power. But with KO ability, all your attacks get +1 when they're in your hand or deck. So your 5s will also count as 6s, which makes it way more consistent. The drawback is that you only have one weapon zone. So instead of being two-handed, he's only one-handed. He can only wield a single one-handed weapon, or an offhand, but usually you're going to want the weapon. And he even has another benefit, though. The first time you discard a card with 6 or more power during your action phase, you create a might token. So might tokens destroy themselves at the start of your turn, and they give your first attack +1. So he gets a free extra damage every turn as long as you're discarding a 6 power or greater. Once again, if it's being discarded, it can be even a 5 because it'll count as a 6. And yeah, you can do that. It's only the first time, but that's a free extra damage essentially every turn if you get it off. So that's the goal. He's quite an aggressive hero. You're going to just be throwing as much damage as you can at your opponent. You have quite a lot of cards that can't even block at all. So he's pretty aggressive, especially when you're playing a budget deck. Usually, aggro is much cheaper. The cards are just cheaper, and the defensive tools are usually quite expensive, especially blocking equipment. And so it's hard to be defensive as a budget deck. But this deck doesn't care. You're just going to kill your opponent as quickly as possible. With the equipment suite, we have some really nice stuff, actually, that is budget from heavy hitters, which is kind of what inspired me to do this series. They have a cycle, of rare equipment that are specializations, so they only work for that hero, but they all block really well for this. So this one has 2 block with temper, meaning you can block for 2, then it gets a -1 counter when that combat chain closes, and then it can block again for 1, and then once it gets that -1 counter, it'll be destroyed. So you get 3 total block from it during the game, which is very, very high for a cheap, rare, or common equipment. You can see most of the other ones, for example, this older one only blocks for 1. This one from the very first set doesn't block at all. So it's usually pretty common for common or rare equipment to block quite poorly, but this one is basically blocking as good as any legendary equipment. Yeah, it's exactly there. There's nothing that blocks better than 2 block and then 1 block. That's the peak of equipment, basically. There are some exceptions, of course, but that is quite about as good as it gets. So we've got that headpiece. Never use this effect, basically. It says destroy this, roll a 6-sided die until end of turn. Your base intellect is the number rolled. Yeah, it's really high risk, high reward, and it's not worth it. So don't worry about that. The weapon is the Mandible Claw. Of course, we can only run 1 because we're missing an arm. Pretty powerful. Comes in for 3 for the cost of 2 resources, but if you've discarded a card with 6 or more power, it has go again. So quite good there. Goliath Gauntlet are our arms. You can destroy them to give your next attack action with cost 2 or greater +2 power. So just a free extra 2 damage during the game. Our chest piece is Raw Meat. This can actually block quite well if you can get it off. So If you control an agility, it gets +1, and if you control a might, it gets +1. So you really only want to block with this when it has both. So if you have both, the first time you block, it'll block for 2 with temper. And then the next time, if you have both again, it'll be +2 and then -1 from the temper, of course. So it'll be blocking for 1 the next time. It'll basically block the same as your headpiece, but this one always blocks like that. And this one requires a decent bit of work because you need to have both a might token and an agility. But might is actually quite easy to get, right? Because our hero ability just gives us a might every turn if we've discarded a card with 60 more power. So really you're waiting to get the agility because you're basically always going to have the might, at least most of the time. So we have a few ways we'll show you to get agility in the deck, all of these cards right here. So we do have about 9 ways at least, I know, to get it. And so you're just waiting to have one of those happen, basically, and then you'll block with it. So that is the equipment suite. Let's go through the cards. So the most powerful card that we'll start with first is Bloodrush Bellows. Not only is this the best card in this deck, it is by far the best card in all of Flesh and Blood for Brute, budget or not. Luckily, it's been reprinted quite a lot, so it's pretty cheap, and it is the best card. So it costs 1, and it is a non-attack action that blocks for 3. It's a yellow, but you basically always want to play it when you can, and you ideally want to play it off a 5-card hand. So what a 5-card hand means is basically you draw 4 at the end of every turn, right? So you always have 4, but you can have an arsenal. So if you have an arsenal and the 4 cards, we call that a 5-card hand because you have 5 cards total to work with, 4 from hand and 1 in arsenal. So when you have a 5-card hand is when you want to do this because you'll get the most total damage. So usually you want to arsenal this card when you get it and then wait till your next turn when you draw up. There's sometimes when you can't. It's really late in the game. You didn't draw it early. You just have to do 4 cards. It works fine with 4 cards, but you'll notice it deals much more damage more consistently with all 5. But let's read what it actually does. First, as an additional cost to play it, discard a random card. So you're going to discard a random card. You want to make sure you don't have any misses in your hand, right? So if you have something that's not a 6 or more power, for example, another Blood Rush, you either want to pitch it to play the Blood Rush, right? Because then it'll already be out of your hand by the time this resolves because you pitched it, or you want to block with it before it gets back to your turn. You don't want to have a miss. If you miss this, you basically lose the game instantly. So make sure your hand is all 5 powers or greater, of course, because Kayo makes them 6 or more powers from hand. So first of all, don't miss. Second of all, this gives all of your brute attacks +2 this turn, which is just crazy. It's usually going to give you 4 to 6 extra damage for free, basically. Brute attacks include weapons because it did not say brute attack actions. It just says brute attacks. So your claw will come in for 5 go again. It'll already have go again because you discarded that 6 power or greater. And then all of your attacks will come in for +2. So very, very, very good there. Then it says if you discarded a card with 6 more power, you draw 2 cards and this gets go again. So the main reason you don't want to miss is if you don't hit, your turn ends. This doesn't have go again naturally. Your turn would just end, so you can't really miss. But if you do hit, you get all this amazing stuff. Your attacks get +2, and you'll draw 2 cards. So really amazing. You get 2 extra cards just for this card. So yeah, you are going +1 card basically, and you're getting +2 power for the whole turn. So the ideal play pattern with this is if you're pitching a blue for it, because it only costs 1, you'll still have 2 resources remaining. Then you can come in with your claw right away for 5 go again, and then you hopefully can come in with an attack that has go again. For example, this Wild Ride, which says when this attacks, draw a card, then discard a random card. If the card has 6 or more power, this gets go again. So ideally, you have an attack with go again. You might have also had an agility before your turn starts. Agilities say, at the start of your turn, destroy this, then your next attack this turn gets go again, in which case you would start with an attack action first to give that go again, and then do your claw, and then end on an attack. But ideally, you're going to try to get 3 attacks in. Claw plus 2 attacks from your hand, ideally, is what you're going to try to make happen, in which case this is giving you +6 damage, which is really, really powerful. And if you're getting all 3 off during a game, you're basically getting +18 damage across the game without really using any cards, right? Because this is actually drawing you an extra card when it happens. So very, very powerful. This is the best card in the deck. Everything else basically is just trying to make it synergistic around that. We're playing a bunch of reds that are 6s, that care about 6s. So we've got Bare Fangs, red and yellow. This says when this attacks, draw a card, then discard a random card. If it had 6 or more power, this gets +2, so it'll come in for 8. We also have the yellow, of course. We have other copies that do the same thing, but slightly different. So pulping, draw a card, discard a card, same thing. If it had 6 or more power, this gets dominate. And if it's defended by less than 2 non-equipment cards, it has go again. Wild Ride says something similar. Once again, draw a discard. If it had 6 or more power, this gets go again. So we have all of those, both red and yellow. Then we have some other 6 power or graders with Clash of Agility. This one you actually usually want to block with. It says when this defends, Clash, where you both flip the top card of your deck, and whoever has the higher power gets an agility token, but of course your deck is quite high power, so you'll usually get that agility. But if you have to attack with it, it's 2 resources for 6 damage, which is totally fine. Here's another 2 for 6 damage. When this attacks Intimidate, so your opponent randomly banishes a card from their hand until end of turn. That's quite strong. Rising Power is another 2 for 6, but if you've drawn a card this turn, it gets +1. We draw cards in a lot of ways, of course, Blood Rush Fellows, but also all of these cards that draw a card and then randomly discard one are drawing a card. So lots of ways to get that +1, and then it's a 2 for 7. Savage Feast is the best card in our deck to play off of an agility. When you play it as an initial cost, you have to discard a random card. It's required. You don't draw, so you're actually at a negative when you play it. But if the discarded card is 6 or more power, draw a card. So basically it's a 1 cost for 6, which is much cheaper than everything else, which is usually 2. And then, yeah, the effect basically just gets rid of a card from your hand and then redraws it. So nothing lost there. The main pro here is it's a 1 cost for 6, so it's a discount. But the problem is it doesn't have go again, right? So you want the agility there. Smash with Big Tree. This card doesn't block, which is the problem. Also, all of these cards that draw in the discard don't block. That's what this little pearl here means. They literally can't block even if you wanted to. So that's a pretty big negative, which of course makes us an aggro deck because we block quite poorly with all 18 of these. Plus this, I think we have 21 cards that just straight up can't block. So yeah, 30% of your deck or more, 33%, whatever, can't block. Smash with Big Tree, though, is just a 2 for 7. So because it doesn't block, you get that advantage of attacking for 1 above rate, because usually 2 resources attacks for 6. We went over the Wild Rides. Agile Windups, when you discard this, you create an agility token. So usually you're either pitching these for the resources or discarding them to their effect. But because it is a 6 power or greater, you will get the agility that this says, and you'll get a might from Kayo hero ability. So by discarding one of these windups, not only do you set up your next turn to be stronger, but you also turn on the raw meat, which is pretty powerful. Of course, we went over Blood Rush Bellows, and then the rest of these are basically all blues. They all have decent effects, but of course, blues are your resource cards. They're all 5 power for the most part. So this one's 6, but most of them are 5. And so really the goal here is just to have a resource card that if you need to discard it, it counts as a 6 from hand. Yeah, there's not much else going on there. You can resolve all of these, especially some of them are a bit better. Like this one, you can discard it to make a might, and because it would be a 6 power or greater from hand, you get 2 mights from KO hero ability. So some of them are okay, but they're mostly resource cards or blocking or discarding. The only notable ones here are Reckless Swing. This is the only other card in the deck, other than the Blood Rush Bellows, that is not an attack, I think. As an additional cost to play this, you discard a random card. It's a defense reaction, and it says if the discarded card has 6 or more power, deal 2 damage to the attacking hero. So we play 2 of these. This is a way to close games that are going a bit long. It just deals 2 direct damage to the opponent if you discarded a card with 6 or more power, and they can't really do much about it. So if you can play both, they're blocking a lot, but you got them down to 4 life. You can basically guarantee that they're going to die once they're at 4 life by playing both of these. That's the main deck. Sideboard here, we've got a bunch of Arcane Barrier against Wizards, and this for Rune Blades. We've got Heart and Cross Strap. This is against other aggro decks. It lets us, instead of blocking with our chest, lets us destroy this to get 2 resource discount on our first attack, so going a bit faster. Oasis Respite is for Kano. Class of Agility is against other aggro decks. Remembrance is against decks that want to go long. You can Remembrance back in your Blood Rush Bellows. Assault and Battery is mostly against control decks. And then if you're going extra cards above 60, sometimes you want some extra blues. So we have 2 more riled up there. I don't have a sideboard guide in these. I just don't really have the time to make that for everything. But I think with practice, you'll figure out, and maybe talking to friends, etc., what cards are good to switch in and out with these cards in the sideboard, or maybe you'll adjust them yourself. But I do think this is the cheapest budget deck at only $30. And we'll look at the Blitz version real quick. There's not much to say. I know I'm including the Blitz versions here as well, but I think I literally just added it over and then basically cut one of everything. It's essentially the same list, but I'll have it linked in the description as well. Of course, the inventory has to be trimmed a bit, but it's mostly the same. But Kayo or Kano doesn't exist in the format, so there's no Oasis Respites here, and we don't need the extra blues because we can't go over the 40. Also, Heart and Cross Trap is not legal in Blitz because it's a bit too good in Blitz. But that is the deck. I hope you enjoy it. I actually think it's quite powerful. I think you could win basically any armory with this deck. Yeah, it's quite strong. I realize I didn't go over beaten trackers, but I think they kind of explain themselves. But that is the deck. I think the main things that can be upgraded, of course, if you want to. Cast Bones is one of the strongest cards, but it's like $15 to $20 a piece. This is a really powerful card that gets you up to 6 might tokens in an agility, so very powerful. And then all of the legendary equipment, he can run a full suite with this Apex Bonebreaker, Scab Skin Leathers, Scowling Flesh Bag, and Fiendel Spring Tunic, but that's a few $100s just of equipment, so quite a lot. I would start with the legs and then the arms. If you're going to upgrade, the headpiece and the chest can stay for quite a while. But that is the deck. I hope you enjoy it. If you have any questions, I would guess a lot of you are new if you're playing budget decks. You can leave them in the comments. I will reply. And yeah, like, comment, subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you next time.